Alright guys, today I'm going to show you how I took this guitar, which had cracked finishes, chipped edges, and brought it back to life. Now, before I start this, if you're a professional luthier, you should probably look away, because what I'm about to show you is not the proper textbook method. This is the DIY, save your wallet, make it work with what you got type method. And honestly, it works. It looks good. You know, can't really see the damage too much, and it didn't cost me a kidney. So if you're a regular person trying to fix your guitar without selling your car to pay a luthier, this video is for you. So before I show you how I fixed everything, let me show you what I was dealing with. These spots right here, yeah, that's not just chip paint, that's straight up missing wood. The finish was cracked. The edges were chewed up, and honestly the guitar looked like it'd been dropped down a flight of stairs. And if you're looking at your guitar right now thinking, man, mine looks kind of like that, don't stress. I was in the same exact spot as you, and I had no idea what I was doing at first. But once I figured out the right steps and the order to do them in, it all kind of just started making sense. First thing I had to do was deal with the actual damage, and before I could even think about filling anything, I had to clean up that area. What I mean by that is I actually gouged out the loose, cracked finish and the weak wood around the chips, and I know it sounds scary, but it's really just removing the stuff that's already broken, so you have a solid, flat surface to work with. If you try to fill over the flaky or lifted finish, it's just gonna fall out later, so don't be afraid to clean it up a little. You're not making it worse, you're giving the repair something solid to grab onto. Once I had a clean flat surface, I used DAP's latex wood filler. It's nothing special, it's just something that dries hard and it sands smooth. I pressed it into every damaged spot and made sure to slightly overfill it. That way when you sand it down later, it levels perfectly with the body. And seriously, let it dry fully. If you sand it too early, it'll crumble and you'll be right back where you started. After the filler was sanded smooth, I moved on to the resin, and this is where the guitar really started to come back to life. I mixed up some epoxy and added a little black pearl mica powder, just enough to tint it and give it some depth. Then I brushed on a thin, even coat. Nothing fancy, no tricks, just a simple foam brush and a lot of patience. The important part is the cure time. I let it sit for 3 full days before touching it. The epoxy might look dry after a few hours, and it feels dry too, but it's still soft underneath. And if you try to wet sand too early, you'll just smear it. So I left it alone and let it fully harden. Once it cured, it already looked way better than what I started with. So after the resin cured, it was time to start wet sanding. And I want to be really clear about how I did this, because the edges are the trickiest part, honestly. They sand way faster than any of the flat areas. I had this 48 pack here of sandpaper. It goes from 80 grit to 5,000, but for the edges I didn't start so aggressive. I actually started with 1,000 grit by hand, because the edges can burn through the finish super fast. Everything I did here was hand sanded, no blocks, no machines, nothing flat, just my fingers and light pressure. So I taped off the surrounding areas with blue painter's tape, and I used a spray bottle with a little bit of soap and water. I don't remember the exact mix, but it's easy to look up. It's just enough soap to help the paper glide. From there I slowly worked up through the grits to remove the scratches from the previous one. 1,000 grit to 1,500 grit to 2,000 grit to 2,500 grit, 3,000, 5,000 grit. The whole goal here was just to smooth the resin and blend everything in without cutting through the finish. And honestly, taking it slow on the edges made all the difference. Once it felt smooth and even, the body was basically ready to go. For the sake of keeping this video organized, I put all the body repair steps together first, and now I'm grouping all the wiring and cavity together. But this disassembly part actually happened before the filler, resin, and the sanding stage. But the first thing I did when I got the guitar was I plugged it in, and instantly I knew that the volume pot was not working. I knew it was instantly a problem. Instead of a smooth sweep, it basically clicked on and off like a light switch and was very scratchy. So I already knew that the pot was bad right from the start. Since I was planning on doing a full cleanup anyways, I pulled the pick guard off right away and started looking everything over. Took a bunch of reference photos, not because I was going to wire it the same way, but because it's always good to have a record of how things were before you start changing them. So I checked the pots, I checked the grounds, I checked the solder joints, just a general quick look over to get familiar with the layout. Nothing too deep yet. I did make my own wiring diagram too, just for visual reference. Before I started rewiring anything, I went ahead and shielded the cavities. Since the guitar was already torn down, it was pretty much the perfect time to do it. I used copper tape and lined the inside of the cavities, making sure each piece overlapped so everything stayed connected. I also brought the tape up over the edge of the cavity so it would make contact with the pick guard once everything was all together again. I'm realizing I did not get a picture of the inside of the cavity though, but after the tape was in, I grabbed my multimeter and checked for continuity. That's just to make sure all the copper is actually connected and acting like one big shield instead of a bunch of separate pieces. If the meter beeps, you're good. If it doesn't, you just press the seams down or overlap another piece. It's a simple step, but it makes a big difference in cutting down the noise once the wiring goes in. Before I started any of the actual wiring, I had to sort out the parts and the plan. The volume pot that came in the Tribute was Indonesian made, and since I was switching to a USA made pot, I had to order the right replacement. The stock one was already acting like a light switch, so upgrading it was not really even a question. While I was ordering parts, I also grabbed a whammy bar, and funny enough, the trem block on this guitar is threaded. Not like a normal G&L push-in style. So I actually grabbed one from my next project guitar, Squire Stagemaster 24 fret, and it fit. I just threaded it on the G&L. I also wanted to add a Gilmour mod to unlock a couple extra pickup combinations you normally can't get. It's a simple neck-on switch, but it adds a lot of flexibility. Before soldering anything, I spent some time working on the wiring diagram. I posted what I had on Reddit, got some feedback, and added onto the diagram based on what people pointed out. After going back and forth a bit, I decided the cleanest way to keep the PTB system working correctly was to wire everything straight to the 5-way switch. That way the treble and bass controls still behave the way that they're supposed to, and even with the Gilmour mod added. Another thing I prepped was a treble bleed for the new volume pot. I made it by putting a film capacitor and a resistor in parallel. It's a small thing, but it keeps the highs from dropping off when you roll the volume down, and it just makes the pot feel way more usable. once all the planning was done, I started wiring everything in. I'm going to walk through this in the exact order I did it, and I'll point out what I recommend and what I don't recommend doing based on how it went. The first thing that I wired was the ground on the new volume pot, and I used a piece of lag that I cut from the old volume kit. It was the perfect solid little wire for making that ground connection, and that part went great, and I actually recommend doing it that way. After that, I wired the input and output leads to the volume pot lugs. Once those were in place, I added the treble bleed I built, and that went perfectly too. Clean solder, no issues. Definitely recommend doing your treble bleed early while the volume pot is still easy to access. Next was the Gilmour switch, and since my pickguard didn't come with a hole for it, I had to drill one myself. I put it right between the volume pot and the 5-way switch. It fits, but the way I did it, it came extremely close to hitting the 5-way switch. So here's my recommendation: measure twice, drill once, because the way I did it, the spot works, but it's tight. So once the switch was mounted, I wired the Gilmour mod into the 5-way, and that was the whole point of updating my wiring diagram. Running everything through the switch keeps the PTB system working exactly the way it's supposed to. And after that, I wired all the grounds to the back of the volume pot, including the Faraday cage ground from the shielding. And this is kind of where I hit the only real problem, and it was I had this grand idea of putting, like, pre-soldering all the globs onto the back of the volume pot, and then just remelting them later and adding the wire into that. The thing is, with my low-powered iron, all I did was create a giant heatsink, and it made the job harder, not easier. So here's my don't recommend. Don't pre-glob all your solder onto the back of the volume pot unless you have like a high-powered iron, because it just turns it into a heatsink and it really fights you. So once I finally got the ground secured, I wired the trim claw ground and the output jack, and that wrapped up the wiring job. Once the wiring was finished and everything was tested with the multimeter, it was finally time to put it all back together. And this part's always the most satisfying because you get to see the whole project come together. And I started by dropping the pickguard back into the body and making sure none of the wires were getting pinched, especially with that Gilmour mod being such in a tight spot between the volume pot and the 5-way. I double checked the clearance before tightening anything down, and after that I reconnected the trim claw ground and installed the output jack. Once those were in place, I screwed the pickguard down and made sure everything was flush. Then I bolted the neck on, installed the threaded style whammy bar, and gave the whole guitar a quick once over, make sure nothing was loose or rubbing. And at this point the guitar was fully reassembled and ready for setup. Once the guitar was fully wired and put back together, it was basically finished, and it just didn't have a backplate, and that really bugged me. It didn't come with one when I ordered it, so I ordered a replacement off Etsy and had to drill the holes myself. It lined up fine, but definitely take your time marking everything before you drill. After installing the backplate, I cleaned and oiled the fretboard. It had dried out a bit during the work, so conditioning it made it look better and also feel smoother to play. At this point the guitar was officially complete, but I'm still doing little setup tweaks every day. Tiny saddle adjustments, pickup height changes, trim balances, stuff like that. Nothing major, just the usual fine-tuning you dial in as you play it more. And right after getting it to a point where it felt good enough to play, I recorded a quick sound test. It's basically the first thing I played on the guitar after finishing the setup. Now that the whole project is finished, I just want to wrap it up with a quick final thought. I know the repair isn't perfect. If you stare at it long enough, you could definitely see where the damage was. But honestly, at a quick glance, it's really hard to tell. And I got lucky with the location because it sits right under my arm when I'm playing. I could have probably gone a little further with the 5000 grit sanding, but I didn't want to risk losing too much color or cutting into the finish. So I stopped where it felt safe, and I'm happy with how it turned out. For a guitar that came in rough shape, it plays great, it sounds great, and the whole process taught me a lot. It's not perfect, but it is mine, and I'm proud of how far I came. If you are working on your own build or repair and you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment, and I'll try to get back to you. Thanks for watching.